Hello and welcome back to Crocoduckscience, where we have a sweet logo and talk about things. And this short episode clip, we thought we would talk about evolution.
Yep, so biological evolution.
Biological evolution. So this came about after Charles Darwin did his world tour in his ship. I'm not sure what the ship was doing, but it was called the Beagle, and he went through the Galapagos with his finches, which is the most famous aspect.
He was doing science, so probably on a junket, and he got interested in something.
Yeah, so then he put forward his theory of evolution. So cheers to Charles Darwin, because that was some world-changing theory that he put forward and just shaped humanity's orientation and worldview quite impressively. So some people that I speak with still struggle with just the general concepts of evolution. So we thought we would just have a little chat about it and see if we couldn't cover some of those off. So I guess first off, some people still think in a Lamarckian type way. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the classic example of Lamarckian understanding of evolution is the giraffe. The giraffe who gets the longer neck over his lifetime. So this giraffe spends his whole life stretching to try and get leaves and trees, and constantly reaching up. His neck gets longer, and whether that could be possible or not, how would the longer neck then get passed on down to the next generation of giraffes? It doesn't make much sense. So that's sort of where the Lamarckian view falls over a bit.
Yeah, so that was the sort of, I don't know if you'd call it a first attempt, because there must have been others, but that was one of the early sort of dominant trains of thought, that a giraffe stretching to reach the highest part of the tree throughout its life meant by the time it died it had a longer neck. But that wasn't the case, and that was easily proven. But the idea hung around for long enough.
So one, his neck doesn't actually get longer over his lifetime by any significant amount. So if it's some
even if it
osteo damage, and even if it did,
how would that change the neck length of your child? Because you're talking about changing the genes in the sperm and the egg that gets passed on.
Well, you're talking about the children you had way before you even got good at stretching your neck.
And you may have already had children, exactly. So that just didn't really fly as a theory. So along came Charles Darwin and put forward his theory of evolution, which, as far as anyone can tell, is correct. And it just shows that evolution acts on a population, not on an individual. So Lamarckian was kind of, whether it explicitly was saying or not, it was assuming that it was happening to the individual. But a person
with Darwinian evolution, imagine you had a population of a few 100,000 giraffes. Now, some of them have got slightly longer necks, and some of them have got slightly shorter necks. The ones with the longer necks, slightly longer necks, have slightly better access to food. They can live more healthy lives. They can have more children. So over time, of generations after generations, the giraffes with the longer necks live longer. They have more children. And those genes are what are passed on to the next generation, which imparts that ability. And that's more of a Darwinian evolution view.
Yeah, that's right.
Why giraffes have long necks.
That's right. So you've got your whole population of giraffes, and just through random changes between the giraffes, some have longer, some have shorter necks. And because the ones with longer necks have access to more food higher up, they can reach more leaves. This gives them more spare time to try and find mates or to do other things.
They have the energy to run
and they've
away
got more
from
energy
to
to
not get killed.
Exactly.
But the point is that they had those genes to have the slightly longer necks.
And then that's what the genes that their kids got.
When they had children, when they had giraffe babies. So the giraffe babies some of the giraffe babies inherited those traits. Inheritable traits is, I guess, where we're going with this. Is a nice way to simplify it a bit.
Yeah, and also, so that was a good example of natural selection, because that was nature selecting the giraffes with longer necks by providing more food higher up.
Yeah, by the mechanism, which is trees, that the giraffes had to use to get food.
So naturally, the ones that could reach more food. So that's the natural selection idea, that sometimes gets missed by people
the,
that I speak
the
with.
longer neck giraffes were selected by nature to carry on, I guess.
That's right, by virtue of the environment that they were in.
To have an easier life.
Yeah. So, and then you can apply that to anything. Giraffes is the cartoon standard example that we're using, but you can do it for anything, any particular trait. What's another interesting way to look at it is evolution that humans have been able to see, in the last few hundred years. Can you think of any?
Yeah, so there's actually evolution of people in high altitude populations. They've shown that they have more copies of genes responsible for giving you more capillaries in your capillary network of your bloodstream.
Higher oxygenation.
Of your circulatory system. Yeah, so essentially getting more oxygen to your extremities and near to the surface of your skin, both for cold climate and for low oxygen environments. Also, they can absorb oxygen more efficiently, and this is down to changes in the genome. Right,
that's a good example. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right, because the Tibetan monks or whoever work at high altitude.
So Tibetan populations are an example of this, and there's South American populations that have also had this trait observed.
Right. So, because if we went to that altitude, we'd probably pass out, whereas they could literally work a hard day's labour.
Yeah, if we tried to, if you went to that altitude and then tried to do like 50 push-ups, then you'd pass out.
And they're mining. Yeah. And also, I've heard somewhere that they can conceive children at high altitude, whereas...
higher altitude. Yeah.
So that's quite a good example.
They've had that natural selective pressure of the high altitude, low oxygen
for long enough to start
to change their genome. Yeah.
To
select for those humans that could, I guess, have more babies because they could work in that altitude.
Yeah. And so Darwin used finches for his. So Darwin's finches he documented the changing of beak size of these finches on the Galapagos over time due to the changing food supply. So when the food, for whatever reason, required a smaller beak to manipulate the seed or whatever berry they were eating, the population of bird beaks got smaller, and when the food supply changed to bigger nuts or something, then the beaks got bigger.
Or just in a different region. So the Galapagos is made of so many tiny little islands.
Thank you. Temporal and spatial.
Yeah, temporal and spatial variance.
Yeah. And so another interesting example is the melanization of moths. Do you know about that?
No, I don't know about that one.
So the melanization of moths is part of evolution that we've witnessed due to the Industrial Revolution that humans have undergone. So in England, when all the coal power plants were running and just pumping soot all over London, I guess it must have been, it just blackened everything. So the lighter coloured moths were getting eaten by birds or whatever eat them.
Oh, because they stood out against the black background.
So suddenly on the black, the white moths stood out. And then the darker moths were safer.
So in this case...
So the darker moths had more children.
Humans changed the environment that led to natural... Well, kind of from the moth's point of view, it was natural selection because it was just the moth's environment. It's unnatural environmental change from humans. Well, arguably... I'd argue that anything humans do is natural because we were produced by nature.
There's another video there.
So the moth has changed.
So then it was documented that this population of moths just got darker.
Yeah.
Because of the soot from the coal power.
Yeah.
So that's one example of human-caused kind of natural evolution.
Yeah. Well, we changed the environment, but we didn't directly go and evolve the species.
The moth, yeah. And then another example, which...
Unlike, I guess... breeding dogs,
where we didn't change the environment, we actively
artificial selection. We did the selection artificially.
Yeah. Poor dogs, they had a rough time.
We've made some pretty
nature would never have chosen those
pretty
dogs.
Unnatural four-legged friends.
And one final example I can think of is the rise of superbugs or superbacteria, which seem to be around hospitals, unsurprisingly, where they're resistant to the antibiotic treatment. So this is quite a scary one, although in the recent few weeks I've kind of been calmed down a bit because there's some new antibiotics on the horizon. But
that's always just a band-aid, right? There's always new antibiotics on the horizon, and then you're always going to not kill everything with those new antibiotics and get next level superbug, right?
It depends how you might define antibiotics, because if you're if you use something like CRISPR-Cas to genetically, violently stop them from doing what they're doing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So the technology...
If you wipe them all out, that's fine. But when you select for the ones that you didn't kill, that's when you get the issue, right? It's just selection.
So these bugs in the hospitals that are multiple resistant to pretty much every antibiotic we have.
Because you'd have to be a bug in a hospital, right? So the only bugs left in a hospispital are going to be superbugs. Because
we've made this environment.
You're using antibiotics, you're using disinfectants, you're doing everything you can to sterilize it. So if anything survives, it's going to be resistant to everything you've thrown at it before.
Yeah, and the scary thing about bacteria,
for these
we're selecting. We're selecting for them. And the scary thing about them is they can easily swap these genes between them.
Well, bacteria.
Not like I can't swap a gene with you, but bacteria can just do that. And also, they have a generation every 20 minutes. So when we evolve, it's over generations of 20 years.
So all the time they're swapping their genes with each other, then they're making new generations of bacteria. So they're always breeding new resistance.
Yeah. So that's why we haven't beaten them yet, is because every time we put a wall in place, the bacteria can just evolve around it. Because every 20 minutes, if you think of population doubling every 20 minutes, if you go home at night and come back tomorrow morning and you're left with one last night, there'll be 1 billion. It's just they just evolve around it. So it's a worry, these superbugs, but that is another example of evolution happening today that we can see and document.
Yeah.
And that is our little piece on evolution. If you have any questions, please look in the little notes section for our email and let us know.
Yeah, just post it in the comments. Thank you.
Or give us a comment.